Who laid out the Midnight's first Clash of the Champions match versus the Fantastics, and what were Jim's thoughts about using the tables and chairs, etc., at the time? Also,
wait a minute. Let me answer that one first.
Okay.
Because once again, people thought, who laid out this match like we had every step that we were going to take laid out before we went out there. Here's what happened. We get to the Greensboro Coliseum. We've been looking forward to this, the first ever live Clash of Champions. We've got our best opponents, the Fantastics. We can have a tear down the house tag team match on this card with Flair and Sting and all the top stars of the NWA. We are going to go out there and we're going to have a match, right? And we get there and find out, because of all the matches, it's a 2-hour show with commercials, because of all the other matches on the card, and because Flair and Sting got to go 45, we have literally, for entrances and our match and the angle afterwards where we whipped Bobby Fulton, like 9 minutes. And we said, what the fuck? How in the world are we going to have a classic, memorable tag team match with an angle and entrances and everything in 9 minutes? We were used to going 20 at least every night, and on the pay-per-views, or the big shows, we get more than that. So we said, fuck it. Let's just make it wild. Let's go back to Memphis. And that we basically sat down and said, okay, we're going to go out first. When the Fantastics come out, we're going to fucking jumpstart it. And we're going to fucking fight. And then we had the cutoff spot, the double goozle on Tommy Rogers for the heat. And then Bobby gets the fucking tag. And then he makes a big comeback, and then that's Dusty's finish, was the first referee gets thrown over the top rope, second referee slides in, counts the pin, the first referee comes in, says no, 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 and then we fucking jump the Fantastics and knock Tommy out of on the floor and whip the shit out of Bobby with my belt. That's what we had going out there, because how the fuck could you call, okay, now, as soon as fucking we knock the table down on the floor, Bobby will bulldog Tommy Rogers on the table and he will go blind. I've told that story before. When Bobby hits Tommy Rogers with the bulldog flat on the floor on the table, the side of the table popped up, hit Tommy Rogers in the side of the head, swelled his eye up, it pressed on the optic nerve, and he was temporarily blind. So they roll Tommy in, and Stan goes to shoot him off, and Stan says, "Are you okay?" And Tommy says, "I can't see." And Stan says, okay, drop toe hold elbow. And he shot him off, but he never let go of him. He guided him to the ropes, brought him back, drop toe holded him, and then Bobby. None of that stuff was called. I called the table spot, the first one, when I said, there's that table sitting there they're going to use for the judges. There's nobody at it. I told Bobby, I said, I think it was Bobby that threw him. I said, when you get in there, grab Tommy, throw him in a fucking table. So Bobby jumps in, grabs Tommy and says, watch the table, and starts to throw him. And Tommy says, what table? And he told me this afterwards. All of a sudden, I'm lifting the table up. He said it looked like it was on a fucking hydraulic lift. A table just appears in front of him and he slams into it. What do you call that shit? We went out and had a fucking fight like we used to in Memphis every Monday night. And because people hadn't seen it and it was different than in that atmosphere, shit got over. Plus, they took some fucking nice hard shots, and it was some good work and some excitement.
That is one of my.
It was not laid out, for fuck's sake.
That table spot is one of my favorites, like surprise spots of all time. And
besides that, just so you know, that was one of those deals where it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. We were not authorized to use all that furniture or do all that shit, but we figured, well, the Fantastics had just started. We wanted to get them over. We were going to take the heat. If anybody yelled at us, we had enough cachet, as the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette tell Dusty, we're sorry, we won't do it again. But the match was so good, second only to Flair and Sting. Actually, Flair and Sting won, I think, both Matt Watch and Wrestling Observer Match of the Year awards, and I think the Fantastics Midnight match on the same show was second on Matt Watch and maybe third in Wrestling Observer or whatever, but it was so good, who's going to yell at us?
Well, the second part of Greg F's question is also between this and an early childhood memory of the Fantastics versus the Sheepherders in a barbed wire match that aired on Mid-South in the mid-'80s. Would Jim credit the Fantastics with being able to wrestle a wider range of matches than the Rock and Roll Express? I'm a big fan. Okay, and there you go.
Yes, and is once again, not knocking either team, the Rock and Roll came first. With the exception of the Fabulous Ones, who really only presented right in Memphis before the rock and roll tag team craze of the 80s took off. The Fabs were the first, but the rock and roll were really the first nationally. And you had Ricky Morton selling, but a lot of people forget Robert Gibson was a hell of an athlete and a great worker in those days, and boy, could he move. So you had two young guys that were quick and agile and underdogs, and you had Ricky Morton selling, and you had the great gimmick and the music entrance and the whole 9 yards. But the Fantastics, Tommy Rogers was probably a better athlete than any of the other three guys, Ricky, Robert, or Bobby. As far as the things he could do in the ring, and he could work, they could go to Japan and they could do that style, but they could come back to Tennessee and do that style. Bobby Fulton, I've said before, was a classic overachiever, where he was not a world-class athlete, but he was a pudgy little teenage kid who worked himself into great shape through hard work. And he was an overachiever in that he loved the wrestling business so much that he would walk through hell with gasoline britches on to have a good match, and understood it mentally and physically was good enough to carry it off. But yeah, they definitely could work different styles, and athletically, we probably had better matches with the Fantastics than we had with the Rock and Roll. It's just that the Rock and Roll came first, and as so, they were more over. The only place the Fantastics got over better than the Rock and Roll was in Dallas for World Class. When they had not seen the Rock and Roll there, the Fantastics came first. But regardless, yeah, the matches between the Midnight and the Fantastics, if you watch them in a vacuum, just athletically, were better matches than with the Rock and Roll. But when you watch the Rock and Roll matches with the crowd reactions and how over they were and how big the crowds were, that's what tips the scale in favor of the Midnight Rock and Roll as being the better program.